Well, I'm interested in signs of life, and I'm just fascinated by the variety of ways that people express themselves. There's a whole nature-nurture issue, what kids happen or any human being happens to come across, and along with the predilection of their personality. In the mid-'80s, I was just a person in LA, and I started to notice these murals going up, and really colorful, and would see sometimes kids painting in a vacant lot or something. I thought, well, that's really interesting. And at a certain point, I realized this extraordinary thing would be gone in a week or a month. And I thought, that's a shame. It really, there should be a record of this. And that's all I was thinking. I wasn't thinking about a book. I just thought, somehow this should be preserved. And so there was this a graffiti yard near where I was living downtown. A yard being just an area, the term for where graffiti is being done, permission or non-permission, as we euphemistically say. And I just went down there and I started to photograph it, and I went up to somebody that was touching up a mural that had already been kind of dissed, tagged up by a local gang member. And I was taking pictures and I said, I'm interested in this. And once they kind of got over my suspicion that I was going to pull out a badge and arrest them, they told me, well, here's this other place. And so I started to track it down and document it. And as time went on, people trusted me with the locations and became a more and more fascinating story than whatever I would have imagined. But before the modern era, the point is that people have always expressed themselves publicly. There have been ways of graffiti. The term graffiti means to scratch into a surface. And that's what originally there was, marking on surfaces with either scratching or paints. Even in Pompeii, what has been preserved are, at that early date, there was popular graffiti, John Loves Mary. There were political declarations like this, and it was a welcome part of the society. So different societies have a different way of embracing or rejecting these expressions in public. And also, at the time at Pompeii, was what academics love to call latrinalia, or bathroom graffiti. I'm sure they had their own version of There Once Was a Man from Nantucket. And of course, crusading armies have always left their mark. American GIs across Europe in World War II, Kilroy was here, which was originally the mark of a battleship welding inspector, and somebody saw that and it turned into a whole thing. Hobos coming into the industrial age, as soon as there were trains, there were also hobos, and it was a way of communicating to your subgroup about where there was a place to sleep, or where there was a sandwich, or where there was a work, or just your moniker, as in Bozo Texino, one of the more famous monikers of in terms of the freight train thing. Any parents know that they've experienced their child marking on surfaces wanted and unwanted, allowed and unallowed. And this is, again, the human expression, just being out there. Youth, in general, rebels. There's something, youth want to show their youthiness. They want to say, I'm alive, I'm a little bit beyond your rules, or way beyond your rules. So this is gang graffiti, and I want to mention right off the bat, there's a huge distinction between gangs and graffiti crews. Sometimes public officials want you to think gang, graffiti crew is like saying potato, potato. But a gang, even though for a long time it was more of a social group and it wasn't the violent, insane thing that has become, there were no drive-bys, shootings up until the 70s. But a gang is about territory, it's about criminal activity now very often, whereas a graffiti crew is about doing graffiti. And the only illegal things that they do generally are graffiti and possibly the acquiring of their materials. Yes, euphemism again. The term is racking, which is to say taking it off the rack and walking out of the store. So, but they're not shooting at each other. They're not, it's not a quiet life. There are fistfights over who went over who prematurely, but it's not gang life. And as a matter of fact, gangs, another reason that gangs are often resentful towards graffiti crews is because often there are kids in gangs that would, rather than being constrained to a neighborhood, writing in a very limited fashion, would like to do their own name in a colorful and creative way. So really interesting relationship, and not necessarily a friendly one, between gangs and graffiti crews. Different neighborhoods, they took on different styles. They tried to show their creativity, and they showed pride in the neighborhood through the pride in their letters. And the reason that I showed the gang stuff is because that was a huge influence on Los Angeles youth, even if they were not gang kids, and that was taken on in Los Angeles graffiti and then has spread throughout the world of graffiti, around the world, in terms of the influence of that style of writing. But anybody that has brought rotten vegetables to throw at me, this is the guy to throw them at, and this is the time, because he invented spray paint. And he invented it, Edward Seymour invented it in 1949, and it was just to cover steam radiators, but it became a way, ultimately, starting with a New York thing in the 70s, to have something very concealable and to be able to cover a large area quickly. So the Lokes. Why do they call themselves the Lokes? That means the crazies. They themselves say, well, to do what we do, we must be crazy. To risk in a single evening being chased by the cops or arrested or falling off a building or falling off a bridge and getting killed, doing that, or being shot at by gangs, we must be crazy. So there is clearly some motivation. Certainly there's a certain amount of that youth thing. There's the badge of honor to find a place that nobody else has gotten before. And yet there's also ethics that we'll talk about. So here we have a simple tag. A tag is a monolinear, in other words, just like you would write a name. That's a single line thing. And here we have Revoke on a rooftop with the crew that he's writing there, MSK, Mad Society Kings, because that's all he feels he has the time for. Here we have Zess, who had to shimmy up this pole, climb on there to write his name. Again, taking a risk that you fall off there, you're not walking away. So it's interesting that there's this admiration for, say, some of the Native American cultures, that counting coup, acts of bravery, showing your focus and your intention and your commitment, and yet in this context, most people don't accept that. They just see it only as a nuisance. And before we go any further, whatever the worst stereotype of a graffiti writer is that somebody may have here, that also exists. I'm not trying to say it's all good, because there is a range of intentions, and there are a range of ethics, and there is a continuum we could say, of vandalism, where there is a lot of work that's illegal but not vandalistic because it's in the out-of-the-way place that nobody ever sees. And then there are some kids, usually the younger, and they haven't learned the rules of the game yet, that will scribe a store window. So yes, there is vandalistic stuff, but the veterans generally try to school the younger ones, say, look, you don't hit a private home, you don't ever hit a car, you don't ever hit a religious institution, you don't hit a gravestone. That's for a whole other kind of knucklehead that, and it's against the rules, as it were. So here, again, just talking about gang writing, just because this kind of lettering, that angularity and that attitude, oh man, that's bad, that looks bad, as in good, bad, that kids see that and they thought, well, I may not be a gangster, but I like those letters. And so this is an example of kids. Pemex is at the top, so he probably wrote the other names. Pemex, Tank, Akis, and Punch. But I happen to know these are not gang kids, even though they're writing in a cholo, which means a Latino gangster style. And just one more example here. On the upper left, that's a modern tag style. And then a bubble throw up, because it's called a throw up because it's thrown up onto the wall. And it's by Pryor. He's even abbreviated his name there. And UTI, one of the crews he's in. And then some of the same names he's rewritten in kind of a gang style, just for the sake of showing a different kind of calligraphy. Again, these are the simpler forms, but the tags on the far left and the far right, and bubble throw-ups, they're called bubbles because you can see why, because it's kind of rounded forms, and that's because it's easier to do a continuous line in that format to finish the letter. Here is a bubble throw-up by Cray. Don't strain your eyes, but you can see the letters, and he even has characters wearing an LA, kind of a Dodger hat, that he's integrated into his letters, C-R-A-E. And he also has his crew, K4P, in the upper right there, and some shout-outs to his friends. One of the things that was expressed that was so interesting when I first saw this, and kids would talk about it, is that they liked that they were doing it for this moment of expression. It can't be bought. It can't be sold. It can't be commodified. The paycheck was having done it. Having done it stylishly, possibly having done it taking risks to get where they got, legal again, and sometimes in gang territory where the gangs would sweat you, if not shoot you. And so it was a way of being alive, of taking risks to feel alive. Again, not denying the vandalistic aspects, but this is down an alley that the building didn't care. They didn't remove it because it's just in a trash-filled alley. It's really interesting how many old-fashioned values are part of the scene. Clear communication, organizing, authority, loyalty, looking out for each other. And even as time went on, there are even support groups for people that feel that they've had trouble being sober, and so there's support groups that keep people on the straight and narrow. And people, human beings, getting together with a can on a wall and doing something extraordinary. Here's the finished production, UTI, and what does that mean? It could mean, there they say, unleash the imagination, also unite to ignite, or it could also mean under the influence. Depends on who they're talking to. But you see they've coordinated all their pieces and the colors of the pieces so that it spells out the name. And here some of them are, just some of the crew by a roll call on the right of the members of the crew. The crew is, for many kids, it's another family, if not the most important social unit in their life. Anybody that's been through stressful situations with somebody, there's a bond. And they're putting themselves in stressful situations all the time. Sometimes they call them missions. We're going out on a mission. We've seen this rooftop on a factory that nobody's been able to get before, and we found a route up there. And so there's a bond that they share. And now that some of them are older and have families, the families know each other, they have picnics, the kids know each other. So it's really moving how back in the mid-'80s, a lot of kids started. They didn't think this would go anywhere. They certainly didn't think they'd ever see this stuff in museums, which it is now. And now they have this history, and it's really moving to them. Another thing that's really interesting is that with all the talk about racial strife and divisions in the world, it's in hip-hop in general, and also graffiti as an extension of hip-hop, is a incredibly welcoming and ecumenical scene. In other words, it's not like, are you wearing the latest sneakers? It's, who are you and what can you bring to the table? And do you get along with us? And how do you interact? And do you have your ego in check? And so these people here are members of various crews. Some of them share a crew, but sometimes different crew members get together. And for example, on the upper right is Panic. And Panic is the member of at least 4 crews because he gets together and different groups of people have a different group, different personality. And so it's like a different social club. And so he's a member of at least 4 different crews because he likes to paint with different groups of people. And he likes to get along. And you have Pan-Asian, Pan-Latino, Vietnamese writers. You have, from the right up there is Acme, and he's Armenian. So you have a big mix. And a lot of kids, it's their central focus. So when there are events like this is a legal event at a supply shop, and they'll get up and there they are with hitting each other's black books up, writing for each other, showing and sharing letter styles, very non-digital. So it's interesting relating this to some of the other conversations, because it is community, and there are specific things of this technology that are expressed, but it's also very ground level. It's very interesting. It's, like I said, welcoming. These girls call themselves the Lady Bombers Crew. Bombing is any illegal graffiti activity. Anytime you go out, whether it's a tag or a throw up, if you have more time than if you're doing a piece, an illegal piece, it's still bombing. And you have these kids doing this kind of age-old thing of working on drawing skills and sharing with each other. And so it's really pretty heartwarming and old-fashioned. These are people at an event, at a paint store, watching people painting, watching these. They're like superstars now, and they're known around the world. People like CBS Crew and MSK Crew and K2S Crew and people like Coffee and Axis and all these people. There's so many people around the world that have connected through this, and it's been the start of an art career for some. Certainly there have been aspects of it where it's been more problematic and the jail time and whatnot, but it's a mixed bag. And if somebody said, well, so what are you saying, it's good or is it bad, graffiti? I'm just like, well, okay. It's like a Martian came down and said to a human being, well, are you saying are human beings bad? Are they good or are they bad? Well, it's the whole ball of wax you see in this world, but it is around the world. It's a way that a lot of kids have chosen to feel alive. So when you see next time a tag on a bridge and you're wondering why somebody would risk their neck to go up there to write their name, rather than just dismissing it as a blight, you may want to look at it and see if there's any style to it, and wonder what that person's story is. It's something to think about. And so you'll see it next time you see a train pass. You may want to take more than a moment to see if there's anything there that you see as expression rather than just as blight. And thanks for being with me.